Hello, mouses! It's been a few days because we've had basically a lot of time taken up by the projects here, but we are back and I'm going to go straight in with some misinterpretations of law, let's put it that way. Stupid laws. Apparently, according to several websites, and lots of people seem to still believe this is true, you need a license in England to house a lunatic. What actually is a lunatic? Well, you've got to remember that lunatic comes from the idea that the moon influenced mental health. So, when the moon was out, you went mad. Well, at least some people did, and those people were called lunatics, from Luna. But it's not actually the case that it was just people who went mad on the moon that were apparently needing to be licensed if you wanted to house them. What actually happened was the Mental Health Act isn't something that's been around forever. In the 18th century, we had different acts. We had lunatic asylums. Now, for those to be run in London, there were a lot of them in London, but for them to be run, they had to be monitored by professionals, people who knew what they were doing. And they did this through licensing. And one of the early licensing provisions that they had was the 1774 Madhouses Act, which required a license that cost £10 plus extra administrative costs that weren't very much compared to the actual license cost, in order to house up to 10 lunatics in a house. And you needed a license for each house that you had. And that was the way of the Royal College of Physicians being able to manage how lunatic asylums are run. Now, we don't do that anymore, so the legislation wasn't something that hung around. Originally, it was a 5-year act. The act was actually written to last 5 years. It was then extended to another 7 years, and after that it was made perpetual, but it didn't last forever because it was actually superseded by the Madhouses Act of 1828. So, does the Madhouses Act of 1828 require a licence? No, it's different. It's a different act, it has different requirements, and licensing for lunatics to be housed only lasted for a short amount of time. So you do not need a license to house a lunatic, which may come as a surprise to some people or may not. Basically, if you're caring for someone who is mentally ill, you don't need a license to do it in your own home. Okay, let's move on to modern law. The current one is going around today. It's been released by The Guardian that the current government has been looking into ways of temporarily removing itself from the list of signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights in order to deal with the fact that currently, under human rights legislation and interpretations thereof, we can't deport Abu Qatada. I have to say that there's a lot of people who are shouting and screaming, stamping their feet like, oh, this government is evil, it's trying to get out of the Human Rights Act, and I have to say, no, it's not. Not only that, but the UK has traditionally derogated from the ECHR on several occasions, most notably due to terrorism legislation that was brought in by the previous Labour government. We derogated quite a lot, to the point where we declared a state of emergency in order to get around some of the legislation. Given that, the fact that we're considering removing someone by saying that the Human Rights Act doesn't apply temporarily, it's still a bad thing, but we're not actually doing it. What has actually happened is the government has considered all options, and one of those options is, should we temporarily suspend the ECHR, or our participation thereof anyway, not the actual whole thing, and get rid of this guy, then bring it back in. Now that, I have to admit, sets a very dangerous precedent. They're willing to do it for one guy in what they call an extreme case, but what's going to happen after that? There'll be another extreme case, and then another, and then another, and then another. And it goes on. I mean, yeah, sure, it might not happen for a while, but it will happen and will have set the precedent. So I'm not happy about this idea. If we can't get rid of him on normal, perfectly legal grounds, then we're going to have to find another solution. And that's my position on that one. I don't like the idea of suspending human rights in order to get rid of a guy who, yes, I admit, he can be a big problem. And he probably will be in the future. But you can't suspend human rights just to get rid of a problem. That's not how we do things. But having said all that, currently people are shouting about how the government is evil, and this is just another example of it. Well, sorry guys, but this is nothing new. Labour did it, and I'm sure if the Human Rights Act had been enforced before Labour, other governments would have done it too. There are problems, and sometimes you have to get around them. I don't think this guy is the problem that we need to suspend human rights for, but there are problems that require that, and that's just how the world is. I'd rather it wasn't, but it is. So next time you start shouting about, oh, they're doing X, Y, and Z, just remember, they're not the first. And yeah, sure, that doesn't make it better, but it does mean that they're not as evil as you're suggesting, and it's certainly not as evil as certain media are suggesting. Okay, that's all I've got time for today, so thank you very much for watching. If you did like this, remember to click the like button, share it with your friends so that they can see what weirdness is in the law today, and do subscribe for future videos because there will be some more in the future. But until next time, I've been Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching The Knob Mouse Show, and I'll see you tomorrow.